we're going to have to work on our communication. Captain Stephen Hiller, Independence Day. Mixing with the world has a marvelously clarifying effect on a man's judgment. Michael D. Montaigne, Essays, Book 1, Chapter 26. Hi, I'm Frank Speidel, retired emergency physician and recovering hospital administrator, and welcome to the Doctor's Inn. In this program, the intent is not to practice medicine or provide medical advice. With the help of our guests, we hope to provoke respectful, informed discussions of healthcare to the benefit of our community. In February of 2020, I was asked to explore on this program a novel virus spreading globally. When I looked for the preparation for a pandemic, I was stunned. At every level, national to county, there are plans. Emergency operation plans, disaster plans, influenza plans, flood plans, and an endless litany of plans, most having one thing in common. They were content-free. As you might remember, my poster child for content-free planning was the Pennsylvania Department of Health Bulletin, which you could see in March of 2020, dated 2005. This document has since disappeared from the PA Department of Health website. No surprise, all the pages were marked draft. After a pandemic took over 1 million American lives, one might expect review and preparation for the next threat. A search for a pandemic response plan results in aspirational, not operational document, such as the disaster plan you see. Plan and thick with such phrases as ensure public health and healthcare preparedness infrastructure supports all effective hazardous preparedness. Equally distressing is a look at the Chester County Emergency Operations Plan. The plan to 2019, 4 years after the pandemic struck, the plan is yet to have an annual review. Fortunately, we have individuals like our guest today, Dr. David Nitsch, professor in Jefferson University's Emergency Disaster and Management Plan. In his last appearance in the Doctor's Inn, Dr. Nitsch brought insight and substance to consideration of what we ought to do when bad stuff happens. When we were discussing the challenge of silo thinking, he introduced me to the original and entertaining phrase, cylinders of excellence. And like all good lecturers, he left us with more questions than answers. Professor, welcome to the Doctor's Inn. What did I get wrong?
Oh, well, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the opportunity to come back again. What did you get wrong? Again, I don't think you got anything wrong. I think where we tend to fail as emergency managers is we're not critical of ourselves. It's okay to review, revise, and fix things that we lapse in.
Last time you were here, we talked about what qualities, what characteristics an effective disaster response plan should have. My notes suggested that we talked about the following elements and qualities as needed. It should be generic, scalable, integrated. I specifically talk about command and control, specifically talk about communication. It should have exercises built into the planning, and it should identify resources and make a comment about the need for after-action reports. Would you comment and elaborate on these and anything that I missed in this?
Well, again, I don't think you miss anything. All the topics we talked about, there was a couple I'd like to highlight.
Please do.
Yeah. So and it was the general that said a plan is nothing. Planning is everything. That there's a lot of truth to that. I think, when we develop a plan, and I'm going to speak, in very broad strokes, when I say we, emergency management in general, if we don't test that plan, then how do we know it's actually effective? And how do we test that plan? We exercise to validate what's in the plan. And we can, take whatever method for testing that, for exercising that. Crawl, walk, run is probably the best way to do things, especially if it's a newly revised or a newly developed plan.
Let me interrupt you for
please,
a second,
yeah.
Get you to elaborate on something. Recently, in the past, around January of 2024, Pennsylvania Health Department rolled out something called a healthcare coalition with regions. Its plan is to integrate everything for responses to adverse events. And one of the things I was amazed at is when they schedule exercises, they know the date it's going to be, and they know what considerations are going to be exercised. Like they'll say, on January 31st, we will have an exercise. It will be in Montclair, and it will be about chemical spill. What do you think of that?
Well, again, that crawl, walk, run idea. That's a typical model, right? In terms of validating or testing or exercising, the world is what it is. Everybody has to put things on their calendar, right? So we can now, do that low level, and I say low level in parentheses, trying to figure out what works and doesn't work, and even in these talk discussion-based scenarios, they're still valuable. Right? And we can talk through things and see in a low-stress environment and go, okay, that could be a problem, or this is, something that works well. So there is some value to that. There's a lot of challenge with having, and I think it's a great way to train, the no-notice exercise. Right? And what do you mean?
Thank you.
Yeah. So what do you mean by that? It's like, okay, it's a very small number of people and understand what's going on. They do all the behind the scenes, and then one day, on that particular day, they say go and launch into an exercise. Good and bad of that, right? So I think it's a much more realistic way of how things would unfold in the real world. There are detriments to that as well, but I think
What are the detriments?
When you're exercising, you're not doing what you would normally doing that 8-hour day, and that's, I think, one of the an oversight that generally people understand about emergency management. We spend 80 or 90% of the time preparing for that 10 or 20% of the time. So that the 10 or 20% of the time that we're actually involved in emergencies/disasters, most of our day is spent getting grant funding, replying to grants, making sure all these other things, or typical HR things we have to do, all these other behind-the-scenes things that everybody else has to contend with, is all focused for emergency management on the 10 to 20% of the time. So that's one thing. In terms of strictly looking at training, I think it's the best way to train. Right, I really do, because you're right. Can you game the system a little bit? If I know we're going to talk about this topic on this day at this time for this amount of time, sure, I can game the system with that.
Somebody said one time it's not a good exercise unless it fails.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's easy to develop an exercise where your intent is to break the system. If I just wanted to continue to throw things at exercise participants, to overload, overwhelm, and do nothing but to try and throw enough stuff at them intentionally to failure. Nobody's learning anything with that.
I agree 1,000% with that, Professor. It's not to make people look bad, but it's to educate us as to what we don't know. I think the exercise is effective when we discovered things we didn't know about our training and preparedness.
Absolutely.
Not when we make people look bad. One time in my misspent youth, I was responsible for an exercise, and for communication, I made the word, you can't use cell phones. What do you think happened?
Communication failure.
Massive. Massive. And this was with an extended group of involving also full-time, but also part-time first responders. And they have become addicted to the point where if we ever lose cell, it's over. The idea of a courier, the idea of delegation of authority to people on the site, is something we seem to struggle with. But okay, so I diverted you on exercises. What about after-action reports? What else did you want to comment?
Yeah, after-action reports, I mean, they're important, but often accompanying after-action reports is /IP, and that IP stands for improvement planning. So I can write an AAR and say, these are the things we did well, these are the things we didn't do so well. And if I put a period in that sentence and file that AAR, my job is done. The rest of that acronym is the important part, the improvement planning. Here are things we didn't do well. Let's understand that we're not going to be perfect with everything. And
the recommendations.
How do we get better?
Here's the way to go forward. Mm-hmm. Now, last time we talked about this, and I am again more stunned because where are the after-action reports on a pandemic that took 1 million Americans? Is there a national one? I can't find anything.
I don't want to speculate, but I will say that if they do exist, they're hard to find.
You'll need a FOIA because they do exist. And it's interesting for our listeners. FOIA is a Freedom of Information or a right to know, where things that were bought for with your tax-paying dollars, you have a right to see what they are. And amazingly, there are a lot of after-action reports out there that are buried, that they will fight the FOIA. And it's amazing the discrepancies, the disparities of the after-action reports. Do you have there's one thing that in many of these after-action reports that just sense the red lights flashing. Do you have any one particular that when you read an after-action that makes you wonder, what are they doing?
I think there's characteristics of an after-action report that should be followed, right? They need to be objective. And I think a real challenge for people writing those is if I wouldn't do these actions that way, is that wrong?
That's true.
And I think that's a real challenge for people. Yes, it is. So trying to take a step back, pull back a little bit, and let's be more objective and say, I wouldn't have done it this way, but if there was no harm, no foul, things worked out successfully, then is it okay? Conversely, if I wouldn't have done it that way and things worked out poorly, then that's something to be annotated. That's not saying that my way is better. That's saying that in this particular scenario, this step didn't work out so well, so we can try and figure out the root cause of that. So they have to be objective and attached to, like I just said, unbiased. Like I can't insert my bias on this. My way is right. I wouldn't have done that, so on and so forth.
One of the things Dave just sends me skyrocketing is every of the after-action reports I read that we got through FOIA did not start out with saying, the event was a novel virus, and the response was based on these prior planning documents. Nobody talks about what the response was to be based on. It's just like, we just decided to do this. There was no comments made about. We moved forward based on the following prior planning for this. And I think that's essential. When people get themselves into a bad corner, you'd like to know, were you following anything? Or did you just, hey, let's get together and figure out what to do when the ice cream truck overturns?
Yeah.
You just don't see that. Any look to say, this is what we thought going into this event. Have you seen any significant events that demonstrated the need for disaster response planning or emergency response planning recently?
Yeah, no, I think you check your news feed or listen to the radio, and there's always something, right? Again, I think one of the silver linings of COVID, like we were talking about previously, is that. People see now emergency management in a much different light. they inherently, the field are problem solvers. So you're looking at maybe bringing them more into non-traditional roles rather than just waiting for the disaster to happen. We can certainly are bringing into more, I think, collectively more planning roles ahead of time. But back to the question, are there any things? Yeah, I mean, there's a hurricane now, and other storms related to that. Thank goodness for Alexa, I have a tornado warning in my little town. This is right before I left today. So there's always opportunity for that, and I don't think natural disasters are going to go away anytime soon. And maybe getting ahead of myself a bit, but I think the human caused technological disasters, I tend to believe that we're going to see those increase, especially with like you said, the more reliant we are on technology, the more dependent we are on technology.
I was stunned, shocked. On July 13th, we saw events that were broadcast across the nation out in Butler, Pennsylvania. And stuff happens. Mm-hmm. Bad things. People do bad things. Mm-hmm. We know that. You mentioned human-driven adverse things. What amazed me was, as Captain Stephen Hiller said, we're going to have to work on our communications. When you look at people looking back on what happened, how was that roof left unsecured? It's a communication problem, just what we were talking about. And I wonder how much the Secret Service exercises to failure communication with local resources, with local enforcement. And that's bad. But the other thing, Professor, that I found destructive was not just one, but two of the directors of Secret Service were interviewed. And they were saying, what do you call it? Ron Rowe said 17 days later, the number of times he did not have answers to that yet was stunning. I think that after action reports, there are some situations are critical. They involve lots of kinetic energy and lots of people and can happen at any time. It's a constantly turning thing. And when something goes bad there, I think you have to do the hot wash while the car is still hot. I was stunned that he got up there, that Rowe got up there and said, we're working on it. We need to do more detail and in-depth. No, you need some things. If you have in the emergency department, if you have a huge challenged resuscitation, you need to figure out right away, if somebody hands the wrong drug, you need to figure out right away, how do we get to that spot? We can't say, well, we'll get together on Tuesday and look at that again. Am I off base on that?
No, not at all. I think like you said, the hot wash is an underutilized tool. We don't have to wait, and again, pretty broad strokes when I say we, emergency management generally. We don't have to wait for a declared emergency, right?
Yeah.
If we see a problem internally, we talked about that 80 or 90% of the time, that we're preparing for the other 10% of the time. There's nothing wrong with saying, how can we make this go a little smoother? Where are the hang-ups in this process? And being able to objectively look at that, attack it the same way, being objective, unbiased, and saying, this is something that we could do better. This is an easy way to fix it. And I think that's the challenge is inherently, I think people are really good at saying that's wrong.
Yes.
Or you're wrong even more.
Yes.
But the challenge is going, okay, now we understand that. Got that out of the way. How do we correct it?
Yes, in a way that leaves people open to changing, inspecting, correcting, and reinventing the process. You mentioned some interesting things about future and managing bad things.
Yeah.
You mentioned the AI.
Yeah.
AI and new threats. What do you see out there that's going to come around and be harmful?
I think there's many people that are much more intelligent about this topic than me. The folks that are actually into the cyber threats and all that, I can speak pretty I can gloss the surface of it, but I think it's the failure of imagination. right? That is our challenge. What the AI is only going to get better. And how the imaging that AI does is only going to get better. And I foresee the ability to distinguish between AI and reality becoming much more difficult. So how do you negate that? Do you start employing, people now to say you're the counter AI person, or is that a subset of counterterrorism or counterespionage? I don't know the answers to those things, but from an emergency management perspective, is that an inherent risk? And I think, yeah. I mean, it's a great tool. It's a fantastic tool.
Yes,
but so is the internet in general. But but there are challenges with it.
One of the things, a disaster plan ought to have voluminous resources. Redundancy is your friend. Mm-hmm. We ought to identify beforehand where can we get information about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Mm-hmm. Ionizing radiation. The number of resources that are available to provide guidance. Suppose somebody spills cesium-137 mm-hmm. out on 202 mm-hmm. tomorrow. I'm not so sure right now, having looked at disaster response planning for my county, I'm not so sure that there are identified, these are the people you could call that would help you with responding to this. The next time I see a disaster response plan that has the numbers for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and they're great. Mm-hmm. They talk. They mm-hmm. consider that part of their mission. Mm-hmm. You never see it. You never see this listing of these are the people that we can go to. So much for my assertions. What's a high reliability organization? Yeah,
great question. So highly reliable organizations. I think those are the organizations, that get it. Air quote, get it. They spend a great deal of time analyzing, and I'll say not paralyzed with not analysis by paralysis, but they take that inward look, and these are then they're highly effective. They say what have we done right? What have we done wrong? How do we improve? Is everybody aware of the goals and objectives? And I think that's invaluable.
Yes, that's
that the CEO and the person working the loading dock, as an example, do they understand the corporate initiatives or just the organizational initiatives and objectives? What do we want to do? And those are the organizations that are effective, and it's everybody's for the most part. Everybody has a voice in that. So I think those are the can we learn a lot from the private business sector? Broadly speaking, I think we can. There's some applications that are a little bit different, but I think in context and broad strokes, could emergency management be a highly effective organization? 100%.
I think every day, literally 1 million Americans have firsthand interface with a high reliability organization. Mm-hmm. They fly.
Absolutely.
The micro organizations, when you get on the next Boeing flight, mm-hmm. and you are dealing with a high reliability micro organization, it's a flight at altitude 38,000 feet at 400 knots. Mm-hmm. It's got JP5 on board, jet fuel on board. Mm-hmm. It's got 200 souls on board. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't take much to really mess that up. But it was designed and built and operated in a way. Every day we interface with that and we just take it for granted. So many things can go wrong. It's, to me, amazing that we don't sit in awe of the number of high reliability organizations out there moving the world along. It's incredible. Yeah.
So, I mean, the airline industry certainly is a good example. Just to distinguish between that, I mean, they are highly rigid, right? There's a process for everything, and there's no slack built into that system for a reason, because it's important. You don't like all those things you just said. I'm flying at 30,000 feet with 200 people on board, and thousands of pounds of this highly flammable liquid right next to me. So now if you try to take that there's no slack in that system. If you try to apply that to emergency management, I don't think you would get the same results. And what I mean by that is if I prescribe every step of the process that you have to take in order to get to the end, that's inefficient in that context, right? I need to empower my folks. Again, if my workers understand here clearly defined objectives, and then you empower them, give the autonomy, give them the resources to meet those objectives, I think that can be equally successful without necessarily going through this very rigid step-by-step process that works exceptionally well in the airline industry, but may not translate effectively or efficiently to emergency management.
Am I going to lose my Christmas card?
No.
Because I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Okay.
I think that the airline industry, let's just take it smaller.
Sure.
The flight officers, when they strap in, they take off. There are some things that are scripted, and scripting is good. And we actually do scripting in disaster response planning, I think, in the sense that we talk about radio protocols and not stepping on people. So there's some scripting there already. And there's a certain value of the discipline of communication. We talked about communication as being, and I think that a thing called CRM ought to be intrinsic when we talk about planning. Crew resource management, that works well. The concept is there is one leader who makes the final decision, but everyone else are flat. You can always interrupt and say, Skipper, I don't think we ought to take off. We got this, this, and this. You have to have the ability to communicate back and forth in a flat surface. One of the reasons that tactical aviation tended to use call signs, I think, was because if I say, Colonel, I think that we ought to, it's not the same as saying, Bigfoot, we need to do this, or Squash, we need to do that. The call signs take away the barriers of authority, but at the end of the day, we know who makes the final decision after he listens. So I think that's, and I think scripting too. The old thing you see in the old movies of when they do the checklist beforehand, where flaps, gears, check, check, check. The response is never taught to be check, check, check. It should be something specific where you have to look at the gauge consciously. Flaps are down right, flaps are down left, 15 degrees, giving definitive responses back so you don't just get into the routine. So much for that. But I think that high-performance organizations have qualities and characteristics. One of the things I think that is holding people responsible when they screw up. You don't, in the Navy, if you run your ship aground, you lose the command. Fascinating to see how far away it got. And looking back at Rowe's testimony, he had this concept that, well, he couldn't be responsible, he couldn't be there. No, you have responsibility. Your responsibility you cannot delegate. You can delegate authority to the people that were on the scene. But at the end of the day, you're finally responsible. We talked about case studies before we went on the air. Tell me about case studies in teaching how to respond to disasters.
Yeah, I think the world provides us with great case studies, and again, what we were talking about before, that's one of my objectives with the program is not necessarily to develop practitioners, but to develop leaders, and the next generation of leaders, and especially scholars. If I can tangent for just a second, I think we. As a profession, emergency management is woefully understudied. So,
is there a way that somebody who's interested in emergency management, how would they go about contacting your program?
Yeah, you can email me. or you can go to the general email box we have is real simple. It's edmp@jefferson.edu. That'll come to my email box, and I promise I'll get back to you. And certainly, you can just search for Emergency and Disaster Management, Thomas Jefferson University. We just this week have started updating our website, so it looks a little bit different, a lot cleaner, a little more information. So
awesome.
it's pretty good. Getting back to the idea about case studies, I think that is it's a good way to to educate people. What it does is encourages them to think through a complex problem, and I think it's what one of the differences between an undergrad and graduate, where undergraduate you're just being bombarded with information, right? We're just giving you this constant stream of information that you have to demonstrate that you've absorbed enough of to get your diploma.
Professor, I cannot thank you enough for your undertaking, and again, you've been a great asset to the show, but also to training the next group of leaders for that. And for those out there watching The Doctor Is In, I thank you for your attention. And stay safe. And if you have an interest in being part of preparing us for the next bad thing to happen, I invite you to look up Professor Nitsch at Thomas Jefferson University. Stay safe.